All right. Are you ready?
I am. I had lots of coffee this morning. You know when you have too much coffee and you get to that point where
Yeah,
you're like,
you
oh,
can.
Yeah.
I crossed the
Yeah,
line.
you can tell you are just full of energy.
You might need some cloud
I had a
lifter.
coffee date this morning. That's right.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Voxology Podcast today. Joining us in studio via Riverside FM, Timothy John Stafford and Suzie P. Lind. Now, Suzie is a dear friend. I work with her at the church. She has joined us, and I think people are aware now that the P isn't your real middle initial.
Nope.
It's B, as in bodacious. But Seth
Wow.
Erre has christened you Suzie P. Lind, and
Yes.
you have embraced it. He
I
sends
have.
you.
It's a term of endearment.
It is, and it's all kind of one word. You know, Suzie P. Lind.
Mm-hmm.
It's one thing. It's like Prince,
Yeah.
P-Rince, Suzie P.
I
Lind.
have on
adding
my
syllables to print.
my text messages from Seth last week. I've played it for so many people to sort of flex my standing in his life. You know,
Yep.
it's this sweet message. Suzie P. Lind, I love you. With
Seth-
to the phone too.
Yeah, seriously, giving you air kisses. Seth
Yeah.
Erre is he's dominating the universe through voice text. So he's figured out, I don't know how, he's figured out his iPad is connected to my wife's phone in some way. So he's figured out what phone numbers belong to who. And then he figured out how to leave voice texts. And so the other day, I think I told you this, Suzie, but Tim, you haven't heard it. He voice texted his teacher because his teacher and mom, his mom and I, my wife, just to be clear, the three of us are on a voice thread. And so he left a voice message saying, hi, Miss Jenny, I love you. I don't go to school tomorrow because I'm quarantined. and it was brilliant.
best.
The best. He is
The best.
That's
Oh, shut up, Siri.
oh, speaking of, after all the time that he has tried to pull that card with you guys at home, he's now figured out a way to go.
Well,
around
let's just be
the school.
honest about the fact that many of us, I'm sure it crosses our mind to get out of something. We can always pull the quarantine card.
Yeah, absolutely.
And no one will
right.
question you.
No, it was the
So
greatest.
smart. I
Yeah.
love it.
It was the greatest card of getting out of things free ever. Guys, we were exposed to
Yeah.
COVID 2 weeks ago. I don't know. I just want to be real careful. Okay. No problem.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about all of you.
Yes, I'm doing this for you.
Right.
So Seth Erre, he's living his best life. Every day, every single morning when he wakes up, he's like, Dad, I need a day off to rest.
Amen.
So, yep. And it's like the third week of school. So we're not even, he has a long 9 months ahead of him. Let's just throw that out there. But Suzie, great to see you. Tell us a little bit, if you would, about your hair appointment earlier today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't had one of those in a while. So like, what did you do? What did you have done? What are you looking for? What's a good haircut versus a
Yeah.
bad haircut? I mean, all those very important questions.
Riveting questions. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to come back.
Oh,
I
yes.
like being on this podcast. It's very fun. And I had an appointment today. It was the first time in 14 weeks. We counted, my hairdresser and I, because there were significant grays to be covered,
Oh, I'm sorry.
which is, a sign of wisdom and grace.
Sure.
There it is.
Right?
That's
Yep.
right.
So, yeah, we just did some highlighting, some
Okay.
trimming,
Okay.
some scalp massaging.
Whoa.
It was glorious.
Oh,
Wow. So it's a very relaxing, thing.
Yeah, and it's an ordeal. It's 2 hours,
Ooh.
and it's a significant financial investment as well, which is why you're seeing
Mike,
so
how
many
long are
women
yours,
embracing
Mike?
their gray.
Yeah. What did you say, Timothy? What snarky comment were you making there?
But how long are your hair appointments? I was asking how long your hair
Yeah,
appointments are.
that's really funny. Tim, I cut my hair in about 3 minutes twice a week. So it takes me longer to shave.
I cut my hair once a year.
I know, but you always got hats on. Always got hats.
It's been like 108 here every day, but I had a coffee date this morning and it was a little cool outside.
In the mid 70s. So you threw the beanie on.
Yeah, it's actually
Is that what was
60s.
going on?
Do you cut your hair here, Tim, or do you go somewhere once a year to have it cut?
Depends. I usually just grow my hair down past my shoulders and then shave my head and then grow it out and shave my head. And I would just repeat that cycle over and over again. So for years I wouldn't go anywhere. And then lately I've been trying. One of my sister-in-law's sister is a hairstylist, and so every now and then I'll go into her salon and she'll do something. Say, make me look nicer.
Does it
and
work?
She does. And I say, thank you. I think so.
That's fair. That's fair.
It's hard to tell. Jury's out.
I didn't realize the financial gift of baldness, in terms of, I've probably saved thousands of dollars just on like the $20 Great Clips haircuts times, you do one of those a month. We're talking real money here, guys. But as interested as our listeners are in our hairstylings, I do have one thing I want to talk about. So I get every now and again I get invited to go speak different places, and this might be the most unique invitation ever, and I want to draw attention to it because it's uniqueness. So there is an organization out there called Love Thy Nerd, and it is about loving our gaming neighbors, whether it's video games or table games or whatever. And they're sponsoring something called the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit, and it's in November in Austin, the Nerd Culture Ministry Summit. And I got invited to speak because I know, shocking, some would say I fit that description of nerd. It is true. I've been a gamer for a long time. I played Destiny 2 all the time. But I wanted to give a shout out to these folks because they're just doing something really cool. Because I don't know, growing up, the kids that played video games were always considered like, well, they just need to grow up and get a job. And the more I've been on video game, chats and platforms or whatever, there is a massive sense of community among people who really don't, often feel like they fit anywhere else. And so, anyway, I just wanted to draw attention to it because it's such a unique thing. Type in Nerd Culture Ministry Summit, and it'll take you to their website, and it's November. And so I had to tell everyone about that. So there you go.
Awesome.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
It gives me a lot of hope for my kids.
Which of your kids are gamers? I know Judah has been getting into Destiny a little bit. I would like to think thanks to my influence. Yeah.
Yeah.
And does Silas play? Does Silas play a bunch?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Silas, Nathan, and Judah.
Okay. The younger three.
Jason, not so much. Yeah.
Tim, were you ever a gamer? Mm-hmm. Not that anyone cares, but okay.
Nope.
Because what's that?
I have the consoles, but it's weird. For some reason, out of all the different things that I'll do with my time, when I play a video game, I feel guilty. Yeah. And so I don't know. It's just never really caught on for me. I learned
early on that I just can't sit and watch TV. Unless maybe it's a sporting event, but so Justy loves to wind down by watching a show or whatever. And I normally don't have shows that I like. And so, but I need to do something that isn't stirring my brain up. And I found that that's just the perfect thing. So there's your biblical justification for video games. Today,
my wife and I got in a little tiny nerd argument last night in jest, but because Barbie just, for Warner Brothers Pictures, just dethroned The Dark Knight, which was just a masterpiece of a film. And so I was like, this is good. This is getting a little out of hand. This is going a little too far. And she's like, oh, what? The patriarchy is tumbling down and you have a problem with it? And I was like, no, the Barbie was fun and provoked a lot of fun conversations, but The Dark Knight?
Kind of a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And Barbie is. It is, but
The Dark Knight? So we had a little back and forth last night about where priorities lie in art and nerd culture.
That's fair. Yeah,
It's fair.
No, that's good.
And then my son was like, "You guys are farting. You guys are fighting about Barbie versus Batman right now."
I mean, train kids up in the way they should go. They should see parents handling very hot button issues. It's so great.
That's right. Nothing's off the table.
Exactly. Friends, we wanted Suzie on today because due to popular request, we got some folks who said, "Hey, we'd love to have you explore sort of sexuality a little bit on the centered side." We talked about a couple of episodes ago about the angel story and the animal story, and how those stories can often fall short. And we were doing that as just an example of what Revelation invites the church to do, which is to sort of query the big narratives going on in culture and to hold them up to scrutiny. And so we've been looking at money, sex, and power. And so Suzie, of course,
the Holy Trinity.
And one of the things I wanted to do to kick off kind of our discussion, and we are, of course, diving back. We got a very wonderful email from somebody saying, "Guys, it's going to take forever if this is how slow you're going to go through Revelation," and we're going to pick it up. No,
you are correct.
We're going to pick it up, guys. Don't worry. But there were enough people emailing and saying, "Hey, we'd love a part 2 to that part 1," and we thought, "Oh, fantastic!" And so we're bringing in the big hitters, Suzie P. Lind, ladies and gentlemen. And I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about this topic by getting into, I know it's shocking, but we could do a recurring segment every 45 minutes of dumb things that people say on the internet. And so
just keep refreshing Twitter.
You can do your own research. So this is from a guy named Tom Buck, who is a pastor and whatever else. He said, this was the tweet: "I recently spoke with a man heartbroken because his pastor committed adultery. The pastor had started promoting Amy Bird's 'Why Can't We Be Friends?' and encouraged men and women in the church to have close, intimate friendships. A year later, he left ministry disqualified due to adultery." And that was the tweet. Now, Amy Bird is someone we've had on the show. She is a really great writer and somebody who is, getting lots of heat, along with like Kristen Dumais and Beth Allison Barr and others, for daring to be a woman in, some conservative spaces and having opinions. And I just thought, the level of just dumbness was worth mentioning. Because sure, absolutely, it was the book that led him into adultery. And even though, and he'll come back in later tweets, it's like, well, I never said that, the book led to this. And it's like, dude, you're just so disingenuous. This is such ridiculousness. But Suzie, I wanted to talk about from a woman's perspective, like when you see or hear things like that are just that ridiculous, how do you process that? Like how does a view like that cost and harm women? If what we're really saying is you can't even suggest it, or it's gonna lead straight to adultery or something. How do you hear that, process that, wrestle with that?
Well, I hear 2 layers to that specific tweet, because I saw it as well and was troubled by it. It's 2 things. A, he's blaming Amy Bird for someone he doesn't even know did. And he's also, in a sense, blaming women for adultery. Right. I mean, that's what it comes down to so often with these conversations, is that the reason why the man had adultery is because he was friends with a woman. And that if he didn't have friends that were women that he was close, intimate friends with or whatever, that he wouldn't have committed adultery. And that's just a load of nonsense. So, and then the other thing is if people are coming back to him and telling him that's how it's been heard, the humble way forward would be, oh, I apologize for making it seem like that's what my intention was. That was not my intention. I don't recant the statement, say what you actually mean. But instead, he's just digging down saying, no, I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Yeah.
Well, it's okay if you didn't say it. Apologize for how it was received because you hurt people.
Yeah.
And, that's not that hard to do if you're really a genuinely kind person.
What?
Do you know what is hard is being a man in this world.
Yes.
Apparently.
And just knowing that at any point you might just fall into an open manhole cover. It's very difficult to not fall into temptation and be seduced every second of the day.
Yeah, because women, we're never actually seduced. That never happens to us.
Nope.
Wow.
But
it's just with a crew that's so big on masculinity and patriarchy or that kind of stuff, complementarianism or whatever, that to constantly push a card that we're too weak to be around. It's just hilarious. It's so
and it just makes
shallow.
it makes women feel like they're dangerous. They're the problem, right? So you can't walk into a space feeling free to be yourself and to be, this image bearer of God that's equal in the eyes of God as your brothers are. And supposedly they think that too. But it's really hard to walk in that when you walk into a room and you're not sure whether, someone's looking at you as a threat to their whatever, to their masculinity, to their
ministry,
chastity, to their ministry.
Yeah.
That's what's really sad. And the thing is, I talk to a lot of women who are, divorced or widowed, and everything changes for them in that moment when they're in community, because they all of a sudden feel this this thing about themselves that, from women and men, quite frankly, that they are somehow a threat to others because they're available or whatever. And so, I don't know. I think that it's a conversation that's worth having. I'm really proud of Amy for putting it out there, because I think a lot is lost by not having really healthy sibling relationships in the body. The Bible has loads to say about it, and we tend to view it as just through one lens of sexuality. And, if we have good, healthy sibling relationships, then I think that helps us have good, intimate relationships with the people we're meant to have those with. So, I don't know. I always feel pretty defensive for Amy, because I think it's pretty amazing that I don't know if she's still in that denomination that she was part of and in those circles, but she wanted to stand by her denomination and even her complementarian roots for a long time, while she was just being attacked so viciously by people, simply because she was a woman speaking her mind and wanting to learn and wanting to be curious. And that's the tragedy there.
There was a tweet I saw this morning or last night that a young woman posted, and it said something to the effect of in youth group, I was taught not to wear spaghetti straps so that I wouldn't cause the boys to stumble. Instead, I wish they would have taught us how to fight systemic racism, something like that.
Right.
All the energy that went into making young women feel objectified by saying, don't be objectified, I guess. It's a weird, conundrum of doing exactly what you are proclaiming that you're pushing against. And then same thing for the men, by feeding them, saying you are only your desires and you're nothing more, and you can't control them. And just hammering that into both sides when people are in high school and junior high is insane.
And just a reminder that Jesus put the blame on men for lust. He never, when he's talking about adultery, he broadens it to the lustful gaze. of a man, not normal sexual desire, but that, intentional sort of cultivation, which was very, very protective of women, because the more the Pharisees bounded sexuality, like some were called bleeding Pharisees because they would close their eyes whenever they were around a woman, or they had rules where you couldn't walk behind a woman for so many steps, or they'd close their eyes and run into a wall and, their face would bleed. I mean, the more that you do that, the greater the degree of possibility that exact thing will happen, right? The more that you sexualize all of these relationships, the more that you've just ensured the fact that they will become sexualized, right? Because the filter is self-fulfilling. And you could tell people who are Christians who've not come from purity culture, because they're just fine having a whole bunch of friends that are men and women, and it's not it doesn't even rise like to the conception in their brains about, this shouldn't be appropriate. I mean, we had at several church stops I've been at rules where you couldn't go to lunch with somebody, you couldn't be in a car alone together. And if you ever had to break one of those for like emergency sake or whatever, it added this weird energy to it that shouldn't have been there. You know what I mean? It was just so odd. And
we're the only industry where that happens, by the way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not dumb or naive to think, if people are going to have affairs, they're going to have affairs. And there are people who probably we should work hard at avoiding because we find them attractive or whatever. Right? All of that's just wisdom. But to have this general sense that men and women shouldn't be friends together, that's so not what Paul describes. I mean, he's naming women left and right as his close associates. Jesus and his incredibly redemptive relationships with female disciples, I mean, all of that then is cut off by the Genesis 3 thing that men have to be protected from women. And that was never the ideal. So I was just curious how it struck you, because, I look at it as such nonsense, but I can't imagine, it's the whole Billy Graham rule thing, like to be a woman and to have a rule that says nobody can be alone with you, because who knows what could happen. And that rule only goes one direction. That's nuts.
Yeah. And it's like, there's nothing said there about the power dynamic between a pastor and whoever it was that he had the affair with. There's nothing acknowledged about that. And I mean, my experience, having been in church ministry now for over 20 years, is that, it's not just the fact that a man and a woman are friends when that happens. There's usually in that particular situation where it's, whether it's in the church or somewhere else where there's a power dynamic at play, like that needs to be acknowledged also. And who knows how, I mean, there's so much more to these stories than one tweet can possibly capture. I know. So the damage that one can do by saying something like that is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the only thing that's great about it is that we've come to expect such absurdity on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now, that it's like, like I can look at that and be like, oh my gosh, like,
yeah.
I mean, other things came to mind that I won't say on air, but
well, it's really interesting. We're in a weird time period. I grew up with that understanding, right? That, you don't be alone with a woman and yada, yada, yada. And that was taught as truth, and I accepted it as truth. And then when I got older, and I think my wife was the first one that was like, breaking it down to the, like, this is what women are like. It was like, I think it was around a presidential campaign or something where a woman reporter couldn't be alone with somebody. And my wife was articulating how the effect that has on the woman's career, like what's happening to her because of this guy's whatever. And it was the first time, I think it might've been, so I was processing through all of that. But what's really interesting right now with how polarized, because that would be a more like, it wasn't that talked about 10, 15, 20 years ago. There obviously was conversation, but as the purity culture thing popped and that kind of stuff, this became a much larger conversation that people were having. But we're so polarized right now, and everything's so, and with what you just said about Twitter or Twix, the like, so look at, there's 3 country music stars in the last 2 years. One of them was the Morgan Wallen guy who got caught on tape, yelling the N-word. And so he had to do some work, but instead people galvanized around him, and his record has broken records for being number 1 on the Billboard charts now, as a reaction to saying, hey, you guys are overreacting with him. And then it happened with another guy, and there's a current one right now that has a song called like Richmond Above Richmond or something. The other one was Jason Aldean with the racist imagery and stuff with like, don't try that in a small town. A bunch of really troublesome lyrics and imagery. He pops up to number 1. This guy now also has a song with a bunch of troubling stuff. And when people said, hey, this is troubling that you're singing about this, another community says, don't tell people what they can and can't say, and pop him now all the way up to number 1, this brand new no-name artist that people didn't know. So it's interesting because the same thing with the Mike Pence thing is now when people talk about the Mike Pence rule, it's no longer the Billy Graham rule, it's the Mike Pence rule that he won't meet with a woman. You have so many people getting really agitated and angry in support of that. Like you don't want to promote purity or say like good judgment or whatever it is. And so it's really interesting that the polarization is like pushing things all the way to a number 1 position and dividing harder than it had been previously, as we've been making work to kind of get rid of some of these ideologies. I mean, all the way to the extent of seeing like the, Nazis and Proud Boys walking around openly on streets. I keep getting updates from Franklin of like full Nazis out on like the street corners. And it's like, man, it's 2023 and we still have of Nazis are refreshed, So it's really weird how these conversations start to amplify the very things that they've been trying to work against.
I just think for a lot of us, it's performance theater.
Yeah.
I think for some it's real and that's scary and needs to be fought against. But I just think in a ridiculously affluent, bored, decadent culture, like it's just performance theater. I'm just convinced that a lot of this stuff, like Driscoll came out this week and declared war on beta males as the source of trouble in the church. And it's like, I mean, I can't stand that guy. But what's he doing there? I mean, it's just that. It's just, hey, this gets attention. You have to be this way to get attention. And so, of course, people are going to rally around nonsense because, the biggest view of the good life now is just owning your enemies. That's like the number 1 thing, right? What's the Republican vision for the country? Owning the libs. And it's just, or watching the Republican tears fall. It's just so ridiculous.
It's all rhetoric, though, until someone who listens to it gets violent.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's like that dude that just got shot by the FBI because he was...
Totally.
And it's just like, then all of a sudden there's the reality, or the guy shooting up the pizza parlor or going into the pizza parlor to stop Hillary's, whatever it was, child trafficking ring in the basement of the pizza parlor.
Now, speaking of pizza, we're going on to talk about sexuality, and the two are related.
Yeah.
Can't wait for this segue.
Yeah. Well, that was it. That was it. No more exploration. No, I just wanted, yes. I mean, that could be a conversation on its own. And that is the biggest thing that keeps me from not being active on social media is it just feels like performance theater. It's just all performative.
Except for I do like it when you retweet something and say, this is hot garbage. That's the only reason why I'm on Twitter, besides Beth Moore, and the Nashville severe weather guy. Those two, and also anytime you retweet something with commentary like that, it's my favorite.
Well, speaking of hot garbage, let's talk about sexuality. And, can you hear that?
Phone's ringing, dude.
Yep.
Okay, hold on. Sorry, that's Big Nate, ladies and gentlemen. Big Nate calling from college. Got a soccer game today. We're checking in. Got to get his mind right. Got to get focused. Got to get that bag secured, which is something the kids say. I don't know what that is, but evidently it means accomplishing a goal. So And in soccer, it's literally accomplishing a goal. But I want to talk about sexuality, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to remind us of the two stories we highlighted and very much oversimplified last 2 episodes ago. And then I'd love to talk about, okay, well, is there a different way to kind of talk about sexual ethics that avoids some of those landmines? And Suzie and I and our little staff team, in the midst of raising young adults and adults that are now in college, I mean, we've had to have lots of conversations about sexuality, and we so want to approach those differently with our kids than how we, kind of were approached. And so we spent actually a lot of time talking about how to talk about these things. And so I've reflected on those conversations, and I just want to present maybe 15 minutes of stuff, and then feel free to interrupt or add to or subtract from or whatever. But like I said last episode, we're not getting into all the controversial stuff. We have a big, we have a backlog of LGBTQ conversations, and so we're gonna just set those aside because, again, the goal is just to model how it is that we're to look at the stories in our culture the same way that the churches in Revelation were invited to consider what it meant for them to capitulate around the areas of eating meat sacrificed to idols and something called porneia. And so there is a Christian sexual story that is false, and we call that the angel story. It's a Gnostic view of human beings that essentially says, the soulish part is the most important part. And because of that, doesn't really matter what we do with our bodies. So we can either deny them completely or we can indulge them without consequence, because salvation is getting us out and away from our bodies. That results in a very over-spiritualized view of sexuality, as we've seen with some recent conversations in the Twitter sphere, and some weird metaphors. And often, because it's over-sexualized and Gnostic, it becomes kind of a bounded approach through the use of purity codes. And we've talked at length about the problem with the purity codes and how they kind of make virginity something that was never intended to be. Virginity in the ancient world really had to do with property and the fact that you knew the kid was yours. It was less about some internal state of what we would call pure. And it took on a life of its own in 70s, 80s, 90s sort of evangelical culture, where the goal wasn't to have a healthy relationship with sexuality. The goal was to just be pure on your wedding night, to be a virgin, even if it was just technically a virgin. And so that whole story teaches us to kind of fear sexual desire. Sexual desire is very similar to friendship with the opposite sex. Sexual desire is something to be worked against. It's a stumbling block. It's bad. And it's the biggest thing that we've got to overcome as men, to live holy lives. Our culture gives us, and again, way oversimplified, kind of an animal story. Remember, human beings weren't just animals. They weren't just angels. They're this spiritual, physical hybrid where we're not just the sum of our desires. And the expressive individualistic view of what it is to be a human, where essentially I belong to myself and no one else. I get to determine meaning, purpose, and value for myself and no one else. And part of that meaning, purpose, and value is fulfilling of the desires that I have. And anything that resists my fulfilling the desires I have is automatically deemed harmful and bad. And certainly there are some great correctives to this as opposed to the angel story. But it fosters kind of an under-spiritualized view of sex, where sex is just body parts. It's just what you do with your genitals, and there's nothing else to it. And very often, it's a fuzzy set approach to sexuality, with consent is kind of the only agreed upon factor. And so if the evangelical story taught us to fear sexual desire, this story teaches us to just follow it wherever it leads. Learn about yourself. It's a journey of self-discovery. Learn and follow whatever kinks you have, and blah, 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 blah. The scripture, thankfully, presents an alternative, which is, I guess, what I would call the human story, the story of the spiritual physical hybrid as told in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and then embodied and enfleshed all throughout the rest of the story. And the human story sees sexuality as an expression of the image of God. It's one of the ways we image God into the world. And so this, instead of telling like a Gnostic or expressive individualistic view, we want to talk here about embodied spirituality and embodied theology. And the fact that the scripture starts with the fundamental declaration that to be created is good. Now, creation can run amok, as of course we see later in the story, but to be created, to be enfleshed, to have sexual organs and reproductive desires and all the things, that is part of what it is to be very good. And that is all part of the package of what's used to image God into the world. And the story with sexuality in the evangelical culture of which I was raised never started with the goodness of the whole thing. That the first command the rabbis would always point out of the Torah is to fill the earth. And God chose to make that very enjoyable and a whole-bodied kind of experience. And so the Gnostic view that somehow creation is bad has seeped into so many spaces in evangelical culture. We have to first start talking about sexuality and embodied spirituality as just saying, man, it is good. All the things, it is good. And to say that being created is good is to also say something about God and his goodness. In other words, to declare that creation is good is also to declare that God is good and that God's purposes for human beings weren't stifling, but were instead tov, good. It was to bring blessing, goodness, flourishing into the world. So in the whole package of Genesis 1 and 2, things like fruitfulness, sexual differentiation, sexuality itself, all of that is deemed good. And we were all of those things before we were ever fallen. So we were sexual before we were sinful. And the invitation then is for human beings to image God. And we talk at length about this. But the idea is that our bodies and the way we use them point to something bigger than our bodies. To image God means to be the visible representation of what God is like in the world. And so to image God with our bodies means to tell the truth about what God is like through our bodies. And I know that sounds a bit abstract, but if we see God as good, then enjoying creation is a way we declare the goodness of God. If we see that God is faithful, then being faithful with our bodies is a way of imaging the faithful God into the world. If we think God is covenantal, then by agreeing and entering into covenants and being faithful to those, we also image the covenantal God into the world. And so there is a deep, and Suzie, we've talked about this, man, you just taught on it at Journey. There is a deep and very unexplored way of understanding our bodies that has nothing to do with whether they're pure or impure, but has to do with whether or not they're imaging or telling the truth about what God is like or not. And so in the same way we can image God with our bodies, we can also image things that aren't God with our bodies. Paul talks about this in Romans 1, right? We worship and give allegiance to things that are either of the Creator or aren't the Creator at all, are just created things instead. So the first part of the human story is that being human is good, and being all the human bits are good. All the parts, all of it's good. The second invitation is that all of the createdness that we share is to be used to tell the truth about what God is like, to image God into the world so that when people see humans, they see characteristics of God. That's what an image was. Timothy, does that make sense? You have this beautiful, like Dr. Jones sort of
no time for
hand
love,
on
Dr.
your
Jones.
The thinker.
Yes, exactly. And then the next step would be humans image God as male and female. And I realize this gets into a whole host of questions we're not going to get into right now. But when you take the biblical story kind of at face, the image is shared between male and female. It's not just the male only bearing the image or the female only bearing the image, although they're both image bearers, but they bear the full image in their unity. And so that the earliest, the idea around sexuality that we get from Genesis is that there was a human called an Adam who was split into male and female. And that Adam carried the image, but now that image is shared between male and female. And when the male and female are reunited, they image God into the world. That men don't image God by themselves, or that women don't image God by themselves, but in their unity, we image God. That's kind of the picture. So if we're talking about what is like the biblical story, and if it's not an angelic story where we pretend like we're not embodied or say embodied is bad, if it's not the animal story where we're just the sum of our desires and that's all that we are, the biblical story starts by first affirming the createdness is good and embodiedness is good. And in fact, it's so good that God himself took on bodiness. Right? The incarnation is the biggest refutation of Gnosticism. And not only that, but instead of disembodied souls floating in heaven, the Bible ends with human beings embodied in a physical heaven, a new heavens and a new earth with God. And so bodies are central to the story. And one of the reasons they're central to the story is because they tell the truth about what God is like. And one of the ways they tell the truth about what God is like is they are differentiation and unity both, which is, very characteristic to the idea of the Trinity that's developed later on in the story. The last thing that we get, at least in the earliest chapters of the Hebrew Scriptures, is that sexuality is real and it matters. That it's not incidental to being human, it's central to being human. And that it is not just a physical or a spiritual expression, it's both. You know what I mean? That the animal side is wrong, the angel side is wrong. Because we are a hybrid, we live in this in-betweenness that sexuality involves our bodies, but it's also bigger than that. Now, all of this can be abused by either story, of course. But the corrective, if we're just trying to get a glimpse of what the corrective might look like, this is where I might start with the human story. And so we would tell our kids from the very earliest ages that all that you are as a human being is good. So when they would learn the words for the reproductive organs, and when they would, when we had the talk, all of it was couched in, this is good. This is a gift. This is not a curse. This is all gift, and it's part of what it is to be human. And the second conversation we'd have with them is that it matters. It's not ultimate the way that purity culture makes it ultimate, but it does matter because it's formative and it involves your whole heart, not just your body. Are you with me so far?
Yes, sir.
All right. Because sex is real and it matters, we would want to approach sex not from a bounded point of view or a fuzzy point of view, but rather from a censored point of view. And when Jesus, if you want to look at what that's like, just look at how Jesus talked about sexuality to people. When he encountered sexually broken people like the Samaritan woman, or the woman who anoints him at dinner, or the woman caught in adultery, or even when Philip encounters the eunuch in the book of Acts. These aren't just sexual sinners, they belonged in an entirely different category of sexuality. And to see how Jesus treats them and welcomes them and they are allowed to touch him. You couldn't be more unbounded than that, right? Even one of the hosts looks at Jesus and is like, well, you must not know how sinful this woman is because you're letting her touch you, right? He was scandalous, but he also wasn't fuzzy. He quoted Genesis 1 and 2 in debates about divorce. He expanded adultery to include lustful desire. He hated the hypocrisy of the Pharisees who would judge sexual sinners and ignore other sexual sins or even weightier matters of the law. And so so Jesus sort of stands as this beautifully centered person when he talks about sexuality. It doesn't dominate the conversation the way that it does. It doesn't dominate what it means to be pure or holy the way that it does for so many of us. But he's also inviting people into alignment with the vision that, that is presented in Genesis 1 and 2. And of course, there are questions. What about loving same-sex monogamous relationships? Can they participate in the covenant? Those are all great questions and questions we've wrestled with before. So for the sake of just getting through the material, I'm sidestepping those. Because what Jesus calls us into, not just in sexuality, but in everything that he does, is he calls us back to our full humanness, right? Our salvation is a return to image bearing. That's what salvation is. It includes forgiveness of sins, absolutely, but it's just much bigger. It's the invitation to take up that vocation again. Instead of imaging us into the world or something that we love that's created into the world, we want to image the invisible God shown in Jesus into the world. And of that, sexuality is a part. And so the most staggering thing that, the New Testament begins to touch on is that our bodies aren't our own. Now, this can be abused so much and has been. I even wrestled with how to even say that because it's Pauline language. And Suzie just taught on this too. I mean, the idea that our bodies are not our own, men have claimed that in abusive situations for you owe me this, or it's your Christian duty to do this. And it's just horrific. So
it's also used to force modesty.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. So a statement like that can either be used to reinforce the angelic story or the animal story. It's just an awful, awful thing. Mm-hmm. But it's still a central piece of what Paul is arguing about why you should not commit porneia with a prostitute, because there's something that happens that's bigger than just your joining bodies. And we don't have great metaphors. We've all heard it's like chewing gum, stuck between two people. And if you stick it with somebody else, you leave a part of them on, the other person, and all this fear-based sort of shame-based stuff. I don't think that's the vision that we're given. But at root of the vision that we're given is sexuality isn't just ours to do with as we see fit, but it's a way to image God into the world. Which means there are healthy ways of being sexual and there are non-healthy ways of being sexual. There are centered ways of being sexual and non-healthy or non-centered ways of being sexual, right? We would all say that porneia is sin against fidelity, right? I mean, none of us, not none of us, because there are open relationships now. But most of us see fidelity as like a central part of what it means. To deeply be connected with somebody else. We would be opposed to sexuality that exploits and that uses another for own gratification, right? We would all be fans of mutuality and reciprocity and delight and partnership. And those are just all concepts smuggled into the big word covenant. But, even today to say sex belongs in a covenant raises all sorts of questions about, well, does that mean the legal piece of paper? And what if two gay people have a civil union or get married in the church? I mean, and all of those are great, really, really important questions. But if we're trying to frame out just a little bit about what the center might look like, the center that is pretty consistent is the idea of covenanting, that sex points to some sort of fidelity, commitment, mutual submission, reciprocity, mutuality, delight. And I think we could get a load of, people, Christian or not, to kind of agree with that idea. If sexuality is talked about in a centered kind of way, where the boundedness of purity culture or the fuzziness of just, hey, follow your own desires, are actually centered around the idea that sexuality is a way that you can image God into the world, then the goal isn't boundaries or fuzziness. The goal is wisdom. And so rather than giving a code for purity, which leads to the question of how far can I go, or what happens if I break the code of my tarnished goods, right? I would want to have a healthy relationship with sexuality, and that would be one based on wisdom, where there aren't always universal prohibitions. And there are times where, man, you're dealing with triage scenarios, and just like the scripture does. And instead of fearing sexuality or following sexuality, there is this idea in the scriptures that sexuality can be formed. Like, we can form sexual desire around what is good, right, and holy. And that we also must be aware of the disproportionately formative power of sexual desire, right? So when you look at pornography use, like, it's not neutral. It actually, there is science showing that it affects our brains. It changes our brains. It affects our ability to deeply connect to what we were made for. It teaches us to consume and to gratify desire without any cost or inconvenience to kind of ourselves. And so we would look at pornography and say, hey, you could approach it with a bounded, sort of thing, or a fuzzy, approach. But we would say, well, being like, the reason I want to fight against pornography isn't because God hates me when I do it, or God doesn't care, but it's rather that I'm actually being formed into a certain kind of person when I allow that to go unchecked, into life. And so, all that is to say, that's about 8 pages of notes in 20 minutes. That probably raises just as many, questions as anything else. But if I were going to try to articulate the human view of sexuality around the scriptures, I would kind of start to begin those sorts of pieces. That I do think it's a centered set approach. I do think it's based on wisdom. I do think that Jesus practices this beautifully, in both an unbounded and an unfuzzy kind of way. And I do think that there is another option between fearing my sexual desires and following my sexual desires, but instead realizing they have power to form me. And so there are times, according to wisdom, when I avoid feeding them. And there are other times, according to wisdom, when they can just be enjoyed, fully. So, all right, that's a lot. Sorry to talk so much. I'd love your thoughts. Suzie.
Wow. What do you specifically want thoughts on? That was a lot.
Yeah, I know. All right, let me rephrase. How does that in any way resonate with your own journey into and out of the kind of unhealthy views into more of a healthy view?
Yes. I couldn't help but think about the conversation we had. I don't know if it was last time I was on with Katie, when we were talking about sex as an icon, and that whole conversation about, I forget exactly how concisely it was worded, but that sex was like a representation of the gospel. Is that what was said?
Yep. Yeah.
So as you were talking, I was listening for what's the difference between what you're saying and what that is.
Boy, that's great.
And I think there's a difference in what was being espoused as the gospel in that conversation and what you're saying is image bearing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, our bodies being able to tell the truth about the goodness of God. So I've been kind of processing it through that, like just kind of trying to discern, like, what's the difference between these two things?
Yeah.
Because when I heard the previous thing, it always felt very, it was harmful, I think. And it didn't really, describe reciprocity or mutuality. It was really it has always come across to me as sounding more beneficial for the man, and the woman is just the counterpart to that,
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas what I'm hearing you say is that this conversation is applicable for people who are having sex and people who are not having sex, and
That's
men
it.
and women, and not just men and women who are in sexual relationship with each other, but just people who are, sexual beings in relationship with people and themselves and God.
Oh, Suzie, that's so good. Okay. Thank you for saying what I was trying to say much better. Because, no, that's so good, because that's exactly what we were objecting to with Tom Buck and hey, we can't be friends. The idea that we can't be friends with the opposite sex is a denial of like the imago Dei and the partnership of the church and the siblingship you were talking about. And that's so good. I couldn't agree more with your reflections on my reflections. So that was
I
great.
mean, I think I read a really good book when I was a young mother of young children. And it was actually by Jim Burns, who he has some great things to say and some that I would just, okay. But the book was called Creating a Healthy Sexuality in Your Children. And what that book did for me that was really great was it gave me the freedom to talk about sexual things with my kids when they were very young, and acknowledging the fact that they are sexual beings. I mean, like, I think 25 years ago, if someone said that in a church, they would be kicked out, right?
Yeah.
But this was like saying, no, this is actually how you were created. And so from an early age, you're teaching your children how to steward that sexuality that they've been given. So it starts with, naming the parts and showing the parts and playing with the parts and who we allow to see the parts and why. And the conversation grows and grows and grows as they get older, and it becomes much more tricky when they're young adults and teenagers, but at least you've laid that foundation for them. And that's how you're actually the purpose of this is to create a center set response or a center set approach to it. But as a parent, that's how you're cultivating a centered set, conversation about it, Suzie. Is that you're not making it something that's not, on the table from an early age, and you're opening doors to have the conversations from an early age. That doesn't mean that it's not ever awkward or that it's still not difficult to talk about, because of course it is. It can be, but it sets you up well for teaching your children, and also as you're teaching your children, learning yourself how to approach your sexuality with wisdom.
Oh, it's so good. Yep. The transition from trying to recover myself into how in the world do you talk about this with the children is, as we've talked about a lot,
go ahead.
No, it's absolutely brutal.
Yeah. And I think what you just said about trying to recover yourself and also talk to them, I think that's also really, it brings up an important thing that even though we are sexual beings, that's not the only kind of being we are. And
that's so good.
Part of why we're having this conversation is because we've either, in our tradition of Christianity in America, we've either become we've made the sexual beingness of ourselves too much or not enough. It's really off balance. And so this is just one really significant, beautiful, sacred, God-given part of who we are as image bearers. So then when things don't go according to wisdom, and we do have things to recover from, we're not just about that. Like that's not the place that we orient our beingness from necessarily. It's just one part of us, like every part of us that often needs to be restored.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. The bounded approach looks at failure as almost final in some ways.
What was
their identity statements.
What did she say?
Rebecca and
when
Sheila.
she said that, was it like virginity? It's like it becomes your identity. I'm a virgin.
It's an identity
I'm
statement.
not a virgin.
Yeah.
And then, with the bounded ideals, that carries a lot of baggage on both sides. So that was a really profound, because that is how we approach it.
Mm-hmm.
It's so interesting though, because I think this conversation is very important, and I have 1,000 questions. I'm trying to distill them down. Because like shame is it's like a prison cell, and you get locked in there, and you can't get out of it until somebody with good working knowledge is able to show you how to open that door. But then you still carry the stigma of being a prisoner everywhere you go, and you know what I mean. So the way that we were raised, it was such a punishing system. And not only did those rules from the bounded thing were presented to keep you safe, they also in some weird way can enable like really abusive tendencies. So every time I have this conversation, I always think about someone like Brock Turner, the Stanford kid that raped the woman behind the thing at a party, and he got off, and his dad was like, I don't want his life to be ruined by this and all this kind of stuff. But there's something about the entitlement that comes with even I'm just speaking for men, at least in this, like when we're raised to think that women should be avoided for all the reasons that we've listed, that is its own version of objectification. And then it's not like mind blowing that the objectification can spin from being like a measure of safety to a measure of abuse. And so it's like, there's just so much to reform in this conversation. So I appreciate like with Suzie, the stuff you just went through. And I'm curious how you guys both like frame desire in a healthy way to your kids. Like, because desire is also something that would be made into a two-dimensional idea and then made really, terrible or bad, tame that beast or whatever kind of language people would use for that kind of stuff. But how, if desire is healthy and it is a part of our true humanity, how do we teach our kids? I mean, I'm not even going to ask how we fix the brokenness in our own brains, but like at least for the next generation, how do we set them up for success and understanding this in a more holistic way? So the physical ways, Suzie, that you were just talking about, I think are really helpful to have a conversation that begins and does not end, to try to kind of understand the physical elements and stuff. But what do you guys do with desire? And what do you do with the ideas of purity? Is all of purity a bad idea? Or are there good elements to purity that are healthy for young folks trying to navigate this world? What do you got?
I got Suzie Lind. Go.
Well, we celebrate desire in our home. We've tried to celebrate desire. Sometimes we don't do it well, but I can, when these things first started coming up in our family, when puberty was happening, we made sure that we celebrated desire. Like, oh, that's awesome. This part of you is working exactly as it should, and what you're thinking about, what you're longing for, what your body is asking for is actually really healthy. And also, you've been given something to care for and to steward. And, here's where, there's this, when you talk about your body not being your own, you have to really talk about what that means, because your body is meant to be, given to and shared with and enjoyed by another person. And also your body is been given to you to steward and have agency over. So it's loads of conversations like that. one of the things that I loved about that conversation with Sheila and Rebecca is that what I came away from there is not just saying, this is what it is, this is what it's like, but talking it through, explaining what it looks like. Like with the comment you made about the emphasis on virginity, I think they said, why not talk about chastity more than we talk about virginity? But what is chastity? What does that actually mean? And what does it look like? What does it look like when you're 14? And what does it look like when you're 45? So, I mean, I think those are all really good conversations to be had, but they have to find their way in conversation. And I think that's how you kind of try to avoid the pitfalls of shame. And I'm not saying I've done any of this perfectly. I mean, I have one kid who says, all I want to talk about is sex. And I have another kid that says, we don't talk about it enough. So I'm not exactly winning at this, but it's just, I think it's just like an ongoing thing that requires more explanation than just statements.
Well, yeah. And that's gotta be part of the puzzle, right? Is that just with the example you just gave, that with two kids, one saying, I want to talk more than them, and saying that's enough. Just in your home, there's discernment and discrepancy over how you approach the conversation. I think that's what always bothers me the most about the bounded approach, is that people just want to be given rules. They want a couple of easy steps to follow, or even just tell me who I am, tell me what's important, and I'll just come in line behind it. But with all like I always think about it with the Imago Dei, that, I think I shared a long time ago on the podcast, there was a study that went out they did surveys to see what people thought God looked like. And then they pushed it all together into one picture. And it was mostly just that people saw themselves when they picture God. And so when you think about the Imago Dei and the differences of how beautiful and wonderful like diversity is across the whole planet, and that is all a representation of God, it's really broad and wonderful, but we like to dumb everything down to just one thing, one line, one rule, one idea. And so just in that conversation of being like, just in my own home, I have to be willing to like pivot and navigate this differently, because just with two boys right there that have differing understandings or desires to engage in that conversation requires you to approach them a little bit differently. You know what I mean? So like the discernment issue is just massive in how to do this in a healthy, functional way. But it'd be easier if we just had like, well, God says no, so no, and figure it out.
I think one of the issues that I encounter a lot is the temptation to Christianize sexuality instead of humanize it. So that's where some of our contemporary writers around sexuality push metaphors that are barely developed, because there is a connection in the biblical imagination between fidelity sexually and fidelity like with your whole being. And so idolatry and adultery are often linked concepts, the same way with like singular devotion and covenant and, God's faithfulness and holiness are linked as well. So I don't want to minimize that, but there's this baseline of humanity around sexuality that is true for everybody. And so when we try to Christianize, you get some of the stuff we've seen out there, that it's a picture of the gospel. And I thought that was so insightful, Suze, that no, I don't know that it's picturing the gospel. I mean, Jesus obviously, or Paul talks about this as a marriage, not sex, but marriage as a picture of Christ's relationship to the church. But for me to bring it back to the idea of this is core of what it is to be human, helps avoid some of the very over-spiritualized, bounded, sort of rhetoric. The other thing about purity is interesting because we had Matt Thiessen, excuse me, and in his book, Jesus and the Forces of Death, purity isn't a moral category. Like if you sin, you're impure, and if you don't sin, you're pure. These were ceremonial categories. And so the fact that we've reduced purity down to sex it's very much indicative of the ways in which we've, found ourselves in a cul-de-sac and unable to talk about these things in any way, shape, or form in a healthy way, because the word purity doesn't actually, it's not, at least in the Old Testament, and I don't think that it's being drawn on in this way in the New Testament, purity just reduced down to sexual ethics. I think purity has to do with, in the Old Testament, ceremonial, ritual ideas. And I think it also has to do with like devotion, like singular devotion, like purity of heart is a concept in the scriptures. But the idea that sexuality becomes a measuring stick of purity, I don't know. That's rough. I don't know. I think there's a lot less biblical like stuff on that than I would have originally thought, based on how it was presented, back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that it's a human thing, the idea that we image God through it, this idea that our bodies are not our own, there just has to be a better way to say that, because that's Paul's language. But I mean, even saying it, I'm like, ugh. But Suzie again was saying the balance so well when we talk about our kids, and in a way, our bodies are how we engage and bless the world, and show up in the world. And in another sense, they are ours, and they are to be protected and nurtured, and they're not, for sale. They're not commodities. They're not to be exploited. And that's a really tough thing to try to figure out. So the discernment idea, Tim, that you're kind of camping on, man, that becomes super important, because I even wonder if it's different, not only between siblings, but as parents. You're coming from two different backgrounds entirely. Totally. And so, to try to have conversations, it just becomes very, very difficult, to do that in the best way.
It's so aggravating, the whole bounded theology across the board that we're trying to, that has spurred on deconstruction and these different things. Because even just when you were talking about how like, we were so raised with this idea that our bodies don't matter, and that we're going to this place in the clouds where we're just spiritual entities and nothing more. It's like, where did that even come from? And picking that apart to the fact that you will, like, I don't know. It's just, there's so many different facets to this that are frustrating because even when you're just talking about the two-dimensional, that is what Driscoll does. That's what the beta male thing is. Let me tell you what it means to be a man. It's one specific thing that you all have to fit into. If you don't, you're doing something really bad. And then women come in line right behind the beta male, know your role, know how to support, be quiet when you're supposed to be quiet. It's the same line he's been towing for 20 years, but people want to be told, this is who you are. This is what you are. And, and then, and a lot of the women that are in that church, they think that it's their God-given duty to come in line behind that. And it's very frustrating.
Well, just think about, I mean, the goal of parenting, and again, if you're not parents, I'm sorry we talk about it so much, but it really presses your theology out in a way that is no longer theoretical.
Yeah, totally.
It forces you into dynamics where you're like, wow, do I believe this or not? But the whole goal of my kids around sexuality was to get them to their wedding night virgin. And it's another example of exactly what you're talking about, Tim. That's an easy marker, right? I realize there's a gray area, and, we used to try to police that. Now it's like, bro, if they're just, and it's like saying the goal of Christian parenting is just to turn your kids Christian. Like that's so shrunken. And so to ask, okay, what if my kids are going to be 80 years on the planet and they're going to be sexual all 80 of those? What is a healthy relationship to sexuality look like? Far beyond how they show up on their wedding night. You know what I mean? And that's just
because I mean, what do you? Sorry.
No, go. Yes.
Because what do you? I mean, like, again, like having sat with people for quite some time now, what are you going to do when, like, how are you going to talk to your kid when they've been married for 10 years and they come to you and confide in you that they don't want to have sex anymore. Like they just, like that's a whole nother thing, right?
Yep.
And there's all kinds of things that happen throughout those 80 years, that happen to our bodies and with our bodies, and it affects how we function sexually, right? So like, what are those conversations like? So when you're talking about purity and stuff before they're married, like having the long view, I think also changes the trajectory of those conversations, because it's not just about getting them to their wedding night as virgins. I mean, there's so much more to it than that.
Yeah.
So,
because you can show up as a virgin and have a very unhealthy view of sexuality.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, so many of us. that
ask everyone who grew up in purity culture.
Yeah, here we are.
A lot of baggage.
So, and I'm all for. I mean, if someone were to just say, "Hey, flat out, is it best to wait and to choose to share that with somebody that you have a lifelong commitment with?" I would say, yeah, I think that is probably wisest.
And I totally agree. I was just having this conversation with my wife. We were talking about how like it got so broken for us in the language that we were given in youth group or whatever. But I do think that it's just the why, like with what you just said. Is it good to wait? I think so, but why? Is it because you're walking in with the chewing gum on your wedding dress or whatever, or these terrible, terrible metaphors that we've been using for so long? Or is there something more about the fullness of all of it? And I don't, so it's frustrating. And also too, like so many of the terms come down to like, how do you define the gospel? How do you define sin? How do you define all these things? Because all those words get tied into all of this and throughout this whole conversation. And it's like, well, our definition of what those mean also dictate how we react to things in the world that we're told are holy or unholy or whatever. And I don't know, it's a lot, but we're a lot. And that's why I think it's such an important conversation. We're all so complicated and different and wonderful. And we've all had different tumultuous journeys that have led us to wherever we land. And that's a lot to take into account. As we keep doing our therapy segments, it's like, there's so much unpacking of that onion to peel off, not just with sexuality, but with everything in your person. We're just really complicated, wonderful hybrid angel hybrids.
Yeah. And discernment, wisdom, patience, grace. I mean, that's the center, right? I mean, that's what enables us to sort of receive our kids, our parents, our other people as sexual beings. I'm as befuddled but forced by life circumstances into articulation and practice, right, with kids that are very much all over the map. And I am all over the map. I arrived technically a virgin, but I would not at all say I've had a healthy relationship to sexuality.
That's how those definitions
for the vast majority of my life. Right. And so if that was the goal, then it failed miserably. So anywho, Suzie, man, you're so smart. I'm just so proud of you. I love being your friend, and I love how you show up in the world with so much grace and wisdom and humor. I'm glad we can be friends, and Tom Buck can go buck himself. You know what I'm saying?
Just got real. That's going on in the Twix.
So we're back, ladies and gentlemen, we're back to Revelation, but doggone it, we had to have one episode called Centered Set Sex. And so it was time. You can find Suzie Lind on the tweets, on the Instagram. If you go to journeystn.com, you can find her teachings on YouTube and on our website. She just did a sermon about loving God with your body. And so, boom, if you want to find out a little more, that's where I would go. And then Tim Stafford and I, well, you know where to find us.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
Bunch of numbskulls. Anyway, you guys are amazing. And you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See ya.
Thank you for listening to this conversation. Voxology is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is supported by listeners just like yourself. If you'd like to partner with us, you can do so at patreon.com/Voxology. You can also join the community and hang out and chat with us on the socials. Facebook.com/Voxology Podcast and on Instagram @Voxology. Thank you for walking the long road with us.